Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. It's Monday, actually, and the patch notes for patch 10.24 have been posted, which means it's time for another patch note rundown. As always, I'll be going through the implications of all of these changes in this week's patch, and letting you guys know what you can be looking forward to coming up. 10.24 is basically our first follow-up patch to the big preseason patch, so there are a bunch of adjustments to some outlier items, right, are trying to bring down some of the overwhelming burst damage that the new items have been granting, as well as a few changes to follow up on some champions that have either been adversely affected by the new item system, or which have been tremendously buffed by the new item system, which tends to be more common than the latter. But let's go ahead and get started with things. First and foremost, Amumu, he's getting nerfed in this patch. I'm sure by now you guys have seen the Sunfire, Cape, Cursed Demon Helm build with Amumu, where he kind of kills you just by standing next to you. These nerfs basically are tuning down the damage of Despair at every possible place, both the damage ratio and the base damage over time, so Amumu hopefully won't be able to just one-shot you by standing right next to you and just letting Despair tick. Part of the problem is because of his Cursed Touch passive reducing your MR, and then doing so much magic damage on top of that, you just could not resist Amumu's attacks at all. So I do think this is a good change. Hopefully it doesn't make Amumu dependent on the Demon Helm build in order to function, but at the very least it should compensate for him being a very good Sunfire Cape abuser. Hecarim on this patch as well has also been a huge beneficiary of a bunch of the items, so right are tuning down how much burst damage he can do on top of the devastating charge. His passive converts movement speed to AD a little bit worse than it used to, and devastating charge gives less movement speed, again just to tone down the amount of burst damage Hecarim can throw out. The Kayle changes are just a slight walking back of the buff they gave Kayle in the preseason, where she gains attack speed from her passive based on her AP. Now she gains slightly less attack speed per AP. So in order to kind of compensate for the fact that her new builds were actually fairly high AP, she could just essentially build straight AP and still have very high amounts of attack speed. So this change is just a very slight toning down of that particular buff they gave her back in the day. Samira's getting nerfed, and I know the first thing you guys are going to think is, wow, Samira's still broken, that's why they're nerfing her, and honestly, that's not really the case here. Samira actually significantly benefits from her first purchase being Immortal Shield Bow, because that gave her attack speed, lifesteal, and crit, which, because of how her ult works, lifesteal and crit are like two huge stats for her to have, and her first purchase was giving her both of those stats, which is actually like tremendously good. So these nerfs aren't saying, Samira, you don't get to buy that, or that those stats are less good on you because of your first purchase having those stats. Instead, essentially, this is saying, Samira, your all-in potential is going to be slightly weaker to compensate for the fact that your very first item is giving you so many stats, and this is going to make it a little bit harder for her to actually find a way in, even if she's being zoned all the way off the wave. So her melee blade damage went down, and her dash range against immobilized enemies also went down by a fair amount, so it should make it significantly more risky for Samira to step up and play aggressive. Again, I like these changes for Samira. She should be a high-risk, high-reward champ, and right now there's just not enough of a risk for her. Tryndamere has some follow-up changes from the preseason patch here. He is gaining more AD from his Q, both in terms of the bonus AD and the bonus AD per missing health, because he's critting less often and for less damage, just due to how the new items work. So I do like this change. I think it basically just gives him more stats, which I'm not a fan of, but let's be real, Tryndamere needs a rework at some point in order to fix sort of some of the problems he's got. So in the meantime, more stats, sure, why not? Varus has a bit of an interesting rework here. Riot are really taking aim at Varus's strengths in pro play, namely his very reliable skill shot crowd control and his sort of bully potential in lane by just landing skill shot after skill shot and wearing you down. Now they're trying to make him more of a spell slinger type AD carry, where he hits you with a couple of auto attacks, then hits you with an ability to pop the blight to get bonuses from that, and essentially rinse and repeat. So Varus has some interesting changes here, like I said. The biggest thing here is Blighted Quiver now does less bonus damage on hit, but now detonating a Blight stack on an enemy champion reduces all basic cooldowns by 12% of the max cooldown per stack. What this means is that it's actually a huge chunk, because it doesn't take a percentage off the remaining cooldown. If you have 10-second cooldown on your Q, and there are only 3 seconds remaining on the cooldown, and you detonate a 3-stack target, you just get your Q back immediately. So that's actually a pretty big deal, because it is just huge chunks off his abilities cooldowns. His Q also received a very small change. It no longer reduces its cooldown by 3 seconds if it detonates on a blighted enemy, but because of the change to Blighted Quiver, essentially that functionality is the same. Now instead, Piercing Arrow increases the damage from blight effects, because Piercing Arrows, now when you charge it up, it increases the damage that you're going to deal. So getting the 3 blight stacks on someone, fully charging your Q, and then hitting them with that Q is just going to do absolutely massive amounts of damage. So it is going to require a bit of a change in your play styles for Varus, in really wanting to get a bunch of auto attacks in, stack up the blight, and then hit them with a fully charged Q or an E or something. So there is going to be that slight change in how you're going to play Varus, as opposed to just sort of hanging back and spamming Q. But the spam Q build, that's still totally viable. There's a lot of really interesting things I think you can do with Varus now, and I feel like he synergizes a lot better with the Spellslinger items that exist in the game right now. The Essence Reaver and Navori Quickblades, I actually don't think are terrible items on Varus now, because of his new play pattern sort of valuing attack speed slightly more than he used to. Also, just real quick, Chain of Corruption received a very minor nerf here. The missile speed has been reduced, and he snaps to face the target direction on the start of the cast. So no more Snake Eyes ultimates. You will see as soon as he goes for the Chain of Corruption, and the movement speed is down as well on the missile. So that's a bit of a nerf. Make sure you guys are paying attention to that as you play Varus and are going for your Chain of Corruption once this patch goes live. Yasuo and Yone, these are the exact same changes. Essentially, Riot are removing the really cheesy Rage Blade build that exists currently, where they're able to get the doubled critical strike chance, and then Rage Blade is turning that crit strike into bonus on hit damage, which is just completely silly. So Riot are changing that. Essentially, there's a lot of words here to say that no longer works. They can still build Rage Blade, but now it doesn't have the same level of synergy that it used to, and that goes true for Yone as well as Yasuo, so no reason to worry about that. Bunch of item tweaks here. Blade of the Rune King was getting a very small nerf on this patch because it was an outlier compared to a lot of other legendary items. Cosmic Drive is a little bit better as a viable second item choice because it gives slightly more AP. Demonic Embrace, that has been nerfed, of course, because it was very, very good. The percent health damage is down, and the duration on the damage is down as well. So overall, you'll get less free damage from Demonic Embrace because it's just completely good right now, so it needed some kind of nerf. Eclipse's cooldown is increased. We've all seen how good Eclipse is and how often you're able to trigger it, so you're still having a very low cooldown if you're a melee champion, but a ranged champion will have to think very long and hard about when and where they use their Eclipse. Very small changes here to Ember Knife and Hailblade. The Omnivamp on these items has been reduced very slightly, but it now includes AoE damage, so you're able to slightly more heal if you are an AoE jungler instead of feeling kind of bad because of the loss of Runic Echoes. Essence Reaver has a very small buff on this patch, not worth talking about. Kraken Slayer actually has some pretty spicy buffs here, and that's because of I think the overwhelming advantage that Shield Bow grants 80 carries. So Kraken Slayer will be a bit more rewarding in this sort of games where you're able to build it and able to basically go full damage. Lilias Anguish is getting nerfed on this patch as well. Again, Riot are really trying to tone down the sort of percent damage over time build, so the damage ratio on Lilias Anguish is down. Lichbane is also suffering a reduction on its damage ratio because of how effective it is at generating burst. And Luden's Tempo also has a change here where the Echo movement speed is down, so that way the artillery mages that are building it, who are supposed to have immobility as a weakness, aren't sort of able to use Luden's Tempest to overcome that sort of weakness that they're supposed to have inbuilt. Note, it will still be good on them. It's not going to be an item not worth building at all now, but it doesn't do as good of a job of saying, your one weakness, you don't have it anymore. Moonstone Renewer, actually, this is a really spicy buff. I know over the last couple of patches, it's been all about Imperial Mandate and getting that sort of significant bonus damage in, but Moonstone Renewer, I think, is a much better comparison now, especially for Enchanter supports. The Starlit Grace heal is doubled in value at level 1, which is pretty crazy, and it still stacks up to just as much of an increase. So that's a tremendous usability buff to this item. You're able to get a lot more healing right off the bat, and then obviously you can still stack it up, but in general, I really like where they've taken this, and this is definitely looking like a much better item. Nashs Tooth has gotten nerfed here as well. The damage ratio is going down. Again, this is in line with the Cursed Demon Helm and Lilias Anguish changes, where they're trying to reduce the amount of damage that you're getting for free. Like I said, the whole point of these changes was to reduce the amount of burst you're getting and the amount of damage you're sort of able to do right off the bat, which you were definitely getting by stacking some of these items. And alongside that, Night Harvester also has the Soul Rend damage going down. Again, this is just all to reduce the amount of burst you're able to put out immediately. Phantom Dancer has a very slight usability buff here where the Spectral Waltz duration lasts for 3 seconds instead of 2, so you're really able to keep that going, especially when you sort of are between waves and not have to make those 5 auto attacks to stack it back up. So I do like where that's at. Prowler's Claw has a very small buff on here just to make it a little bit more interesting as an item choice. Riftmaker, again, that's getting nerfed, same deal as all the rest of the items I've been talking about, so not a big deal there. Serpent's Fang has a very small buff here just to more reinforce what it's supposed to be good at and make it even better at that thing. Tear the Goddess has some very small changes as well because Riot are really trying to make it so that champions who are bound to tier feel a little bit better about going for that tier first build because of the loss of being able to go the Doran's item first buy and then sort of have that bonus health. So Tear the Goddess gives more mana right off the bat and doesn't take as long to stack up to its maximum bonus mana. Archangel Staff and Mana Mune also grant more mana overall, and Seraph's Embrace and Mura mana also have slightly more mana than they did before, so you won't be feeling those mana issues quite as much as you currently do on live. This is a really interesting change here with the mid lane minions. Essentially what this is doing is saying that the cannon minions are slightly worth less, and they're going to deal more damage to your towers. So mid lane is going to have slightly less income than some of the other lanes on the map because of the cannon minions being slightly worth less. And because they have increased attack speed against towers, your towers can really take a beating if you choose to leave on a cannon minion wave to go roam. You're going to be giving up some gold, of course, but also you'll potentially be giving up a lot more damage on your tower because of how much damage they are going to be doing now thanks to that increased attack speed. Also, this is not a early game change. This is permanent, which means that if your opponents are trying to shove mid lane with a Baron buff afterwards, those cannon minions Baron buffed up will also be benefiting from the 30% attack speed against towers, which is pretty spicy. It should make it a little bit easier to break those mid lane towers, especially later in the game when your opponents have a ton of wave clear. Really interesting change here. The behavioral systems are getting the early surrender implementation on this next patch. So if there's an AFK player detected on your team after the 10-minute mark, a surrender vote can occur. The vote must be unanimous. If it isn't, then at 15 minutes, you can vote again, but now you only need a majority vote. So what this means is someone connected, they played out for a few minutes, they went 0-3, basically totally fed your lane, and then AFK'd. Now you have the ability to get out of that game much more quickly than you can currently on live, and there's no real way to troll that because if they're gone, you need a unanimous vote, but all 4 members of your team should be saying, yeah, I think we want out of this game. Additionally, your LP loss may be reduced if a player on your team leaves during a ranked match or is detected as an AFK. So hopefully this means that if they are trying to go AFK or disconnect, especially if they're trying to hold you hostage, that at the very least you won't take as much of an LP hit for that behavior. And really, that's about it, guys. There was the small changes here on the Kha'Zix and Vel'Koz particle effect update, so they'll feel a little bit sharper and cleaner than they used to, but that's about it. Like I said, a ton of very small item tweaks to reduce damage, and then just some small champion tweaks to kind of fix some oddball interactions and things that have buffed up champions in surprising ways. Amumu, I don't think anyone expected that champ to be incredibly good over this preseason, but turns out he is. So either way, let me know what changes you're most excited for down in the comments. I know I can't wait to get my hands on the new Varus rework, but let me know what you're excited to see down in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days like today as well. Once again, thank you all so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.